Welcome to Road to Cana, where we focus on marriage readiness for single Catholics.
On the road to Cana, there's gonna be terrain, 'cause a life of love takes time to find the way. On the road to Cana, remember who's the key, 'cause if marriage is to last, it will take three. 'Cause if marriage is to last, if marriage is to last, 'cause if marriage is to last, it will take three. On the road, we'll take three. On the road, we'll take three. On the road, we'll take three. On the road.
We're here with Father Edward Connolly, parish priest in the Diocese of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Father.
Thank you, Mr. Buono.
We're going to talk about marriage today. Marriage and what went wrong, and the history of marriage, the state of marriage. But it's probably most appropriate that we talk about marriage itself. There seems to be some confusion, I think. So why don't we address what is marriage, at least as far as the Church is concerned?
Well, the preferred word, I guess, Mr. Buono, would be matrimony. We speak about the sacrament of matrimony. And matrimony, the word itself, if you'll pardon a little bit of Latin, comes from two words, mater and munus, which means the office or the duty of being a mother. And so matrimony is fundamentally a covenant between a man and a woman, one of each, one man, one woman, whereby they give to one another rights. But these rights have to be exclusive and permanent. And you say, well, rights to what? Well, rights to perform with one another those actions which in and of themselves tend toward the reproduction, the procreation of the human race. So inseparable from the whole idea of matrimony is the generation of new life and the raising of new life within the context of the exclusive and permanent love of this one man and this one woman.
Some of that gets kind of cold sounding, I know, for people today, but one thing that's very interesting about that to me is it seems a strange concept. When first thing you think of with marriage is not confecting motherhood on a woman. And what a very honorable thing for a man to do is to confect motherhood on the woman.
Oh, it's the greatest gift that a woman can give to a man, to give him the gift of fatherhood, and for him to give her the gift of motherhood. There is nothing greater than to give yourself to someone else for the sake of another party. Nothing more noble than self-sacrificing love between husband and wife to bring new children into the world.
Right.
God likes human beings, you know, Mr. Buono. In fact, he likes them very much. God wants to populate heaven with many, many, many human beings.
Yeah. Now we know that those who are older and maybe are beyond the childbearing years and still eligible for sacramental marriage can still marry and still play a role in this confecting of motherhood or the parental calling of marriage.
Oh, absolutely. I've heard it said, Mr. Buono, and this has to be understood in context, or else a person like myself would be up the creek. No man is really a man unless he's a father. And no woman is really a woman unless she's a mother. Now, before people jump up and down and start screaming, we have to say that has to be understood in context. Now, I know that you are a father in the very literal sense of a father. I'm a father in the metaphorical sense. I have no biological children, that's for sure. But I do have, and more as the years go past, more and more persons to whom I exercise a fatherly role, and in that I find my own humanity, my own identity, and everyone must do that to somehow or other mother or father new human beings.
That's right. So that is the highest calling, and that is the vocation of marriage. And we can sum up the whole series by saying marriage is about self-donation, a self-giving, a giving of self. So really, if that is what our focus is, we really have a problem seeing that today. Something has definitely gone wrong in the state of marriage, the history of marriage. So when did it happen? Is the 50s? Did something go wrong in the 50s? Something happened in maybe the Industrial Revolution? When did marriage start to break down?
Well, of course, you and I are talking in the terms of we are 21st century persons, and so we would all say, well, it happened in the 20th century. But if you and I were talking 100 years ago, we would say, well, it all started in the 19th century, or 200 years ago. Oh, it all started in the 18th century. Actually, it all started in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. Marriage started to break down. I just happen to have a Bible with me. Isn't that
just
convenient?
So happens to have it.
And we have that lovely dialogue between the first two human beings where God says to Adam, have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? And the man said, the woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me fruit of the tree and I ate. So we say, what a gallant husband, right? Put the blame on the lady. And so we find even then the curse that comes down upon the human beings is that somehow or other the relationship between man and woman gets twisted. I'll leave it to scripture scholars to interpret this, but somehow or other he says to the woman, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children, yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Now, that doesn't sound too lovely to me. Somehow or other there's an ambiguity introduced into the whole husband-wife relationship. And in the 4th chapter of Genesis, we have a character who just makes a short appearance in the Bible. He's not too well known. His name is Lamech. I'm looking at the 4th chapter, verses 23 and 24. And he's a descendant of Cain. And he's the first human being recorded to have more than one wife. And his wife's names, the poor ladies, are Ada and Zillah. And Lamech says, I'll put on my best Lamech voice here. Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, hearken to what I say. I have slain a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold. We say thank you very much, Lamech, for your contribution to the Bible there. But he is the original macho man, the man who's all about himself. He's into, fulfillment, self-fulfillment. And he lets his wives know it, and they are subservient to him. So, that's a long-winded answer to your question, when did it all start to go down the tubes? But some people will say, well, it started to go down the tubes, especially in the 1960s. I guess that's true. A new element came into existence in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. You're too young to remember that, I think, but I remember it. Artificial contraception, the pill, where it became possible very easily for men and women to contracept. And so man could now look at woman and say, I can have her without any responsibility accruing to me as a result. That was a disaster.
That's a huge key. Responsibility with the action of sexuality. And certainly we know marriage has had its challenges over the years since the beginning, but it is an acute challenge today in recent history. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn to our expert panel that we've taken interviews on earlier, and we're going to have them discuss this problem further, see what they have to say about the state of marriage today and what went wrong.
What's happened to marriage and why? Oh, that's a really challenging question, Anthony. A lot of things have been happening to marriage. Some are good. The writings of John Paul II are a great gift, an extraordinary gift to us. So that's a gift. But on the dark side, what's been happening to marriage is that a number of bad things have been happening to marriage. The basic ability to commit would appear to be collapsing. And that the idea of a lifetime of commitment to another human being is not valued the way it was valued previously. I think also what's happening is because as the moral code of the culture diminishes, selfishness grows. Selfishness, many popes have written that selfishness is the major enemy of marital love. So we have this rise in selfishness, and what does it do? It blocks loving. It totally blocks the ability to keep giving and receiving love. And so many couples, first couple of years of marriage, they're unhappy, they don't want to make any sacrifices, and marriages end. So a number of issues in the culture and in the human personality, the change in the personality, people are not focusing on developing a healthy character, a healthy personality, the way they used to. Instead, they're focusing upon me, me, me.
And as far as I'm concerned, this is a declining culture. Cultures are systems of thought that lead people to understand how they must live and to keep the human race going. And the culture in the United States and in Europe and European-style countries is very weak right now because it is not protecting the basic building block of society, which is the family.
And marriage, at least in the sense of Christendom, that is the history of Christianity over the last 2,000 years, marriage has never been in a more perilous state, without question. That is, for centuries, literally, certainly up to the Reformation, and then to a great extent right to the middle of the 20th century, it was understood very clearly that a marriage was something that took place between a man and a woman, and that its primary purpose, above all, was to be the openness to life, that is, to having children, and that from a Catholic point of view, it was also an expression of the mutual love between the spouses, and at the same time, it was a sacrament, that is, a means of holiness, a way for a spouse to help the other spouse get to the ultimate goal for all of us, which is heaven. And over the course of certainly the 20th century, and now very young in this new century, we've seen developments that were really unthought of in terms of marriage. And
I think it was the use of artificial contraceptives, more than anything else, that influenced men to view women more and more as sources of pleasure, not as someone you want to work to develop a deep friendship with, but someone you could use for fleeting pleasure and then move on. So I think that was the use of artificial contraceptives in the culture, I think, focused a major turning point for men and women in terms of how they viewed relationships. And they began to view people more as objects than as friends.
When you have no respect for the individual, the only people who get what looks like respect are the powerful. Now, in the United States, at the present time, you have hedonism, the idea that my purpose in life is to have as much pleasure as I can get.
Because as selfishness grows, people are not willing to make the sacrifice, not willing to really commit and give themselves long-term to a marital relationships. Many people are encouraging people, well, if you're not happy, and you have the right to always be happy, so if you're not always happy, and this person is not always making you happy, then you have the right to consider other options. This is totally neglecting the fact that many people bring into their marriage degrees of unhappiness, which in the past, if they had a healthy spiritual life, there was enormous comfort in the spiritual life that can offset sadness. At a recent American Psychiatric Association meeting, a big study of the role of religion and depressive illness showed that those people who had healthy religious practices had less depressive illness. So one can find comfort in the spiritual life to strengthen you in your marriage. Many people, unfortunately, are not turning there any longer.
But certainly it's very clear that the idea of the indissolubility of marriage has virtually disappeared in many places. in some ways you could say marriage has disappeared, because indissolubility, the idea that a man cleaves to his wife and the wife cleaves, is using the biblical expression, to her husband, and that their union is something that only ends with the death of one or the other, is at the very heart of what marriage is. It's what makes it different from simply being a breakable contract. And so when divorce entered into the world, and particularly in the 20th century, and it gradually became considered as normal, marriage was already in an incredible breakdown mode, which continues today. You only have to look at the rate, which goes up and up in Western society, of people who enter into marriage, and what percentage of them eventually their marriages end in divorce. And of course, from a Catholic point of view, a marriage can't end in divorce. A marriage always continues until either one or the other of the spouses is dead. And there are other factors which, if you'd like, later on we could talk about, but obviously the whole question of contraception entering into marriage, the idea of limiting children, of not being open to life, using artificial means to prevent having children, is something that's done enormous damage. Not even to speak of the obvious adultery that's going on, the influence of a woman being seen as a sexual object rather than as a spouse and as a mate, as a person.
Well, we know that the couples who live together have a divorce rate of 75%. So that's grim, very grim. And why? I think basically because they're using each other. The contraceptive mentality is based on the utilitarian philosophy. So it's based on narcissism. I'm using you. I'm not going to share life with you. I'm not going to share a child with you. I'm using you. So that seriously harms the loving relationship.
The popular culture communicated by the media is purely narcissistic, self-serving, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, the old paganism. But many people, because the natural law is written on the human heart, and many people because of the fear of loneliness, they recognize, at least unconsciously, that this kind of culture is terribly lonely. Mr. Goodbar disappears. And so many people react strongly against the culture. And you have 3 or 4 different groups. You have the group that are bright and explicitly contradictory to the culture. Then you have the very large number of people who are genuinely religious. There's a lot of very religious people in this country, and of many different denominations, and they intuitively reject the culture, but they're pulled into it in little ways. Buy a new car that you don't need, and get something fancy that you don't need. And then you have the people that are really somewhat immersed in hedonism, but they don't like its results. And these are the people who end up being divorced because they get married on a rather confused understanding of marriage. And they hope for the best, but they're unwilling or unable to make an investment in selflessness. So, and they maybe get married in church, but 8 or 9 months later, you'll hear 2 rather infantile adults complaining bitterly that the other one is not taking care of their needs. So they got married to have their needs fulfilled. Which, any marriage has need fulfillment, but it can't be the top line. And then, of course, you have the people who are utterly uncommitted. Hermann Hesse, the great novelist in Germany, called them Steppenwolf, the wolves of the desert, the wolves of the steppes. And unfortunately, much of the media is about this. The Romans had a statement, homo homini lupus, every man a wolf to his neighbor.
In the corporate world, we see this regularly in terms of corporations used to be committed to people and their families. That is disappearing, okay, for various reasons. But also personally, people are are looking at as a person as an object to be used, not as a human person to be cherished. And this is, of course, the driving force behind sexual immorality. That once a person becomes sexually promiscuous, high school, college, it's very difficult to break out of that and to shift and then to recognize this person is not a sexual object. This is a special person that you're meant to treasure and value. So John Paul's II personalist philosophy and his critique of the sexual utilitarian philosophy in Love and Responsibility and Theology of the Body are great gifts to us. And I just hope that more and more couples and families read them, teach them to their children.
Well, some of the enemies of marriage include certainly, one, the idea that a marriage can end, that is while the spouses are alive. The idea that a couple can get together and say, if this doesn't work out, one or the other of us can bail out. And then also that we have a right, so to speak, to marry again. Now, it's unfortunately, even in Catholic circles, it's regarded, we'll not say as good, but something that is normal. As people do not see it as a permanent, lifelong commitment of one person to another that is sanctioned and witnessed by God and the Church. So that's the biggest enemy.
I've heard many married couples come in here where there have been significant conflicts in the marriage, and the wife in particular has been able to articulate, well, our marriage suffered because I became his sexual object. Because I was contracepting, he could use me sexually any time he wanted to. That wounded our communication, it wounded our sensitivity to me. He always thought that I had to be sexually available to him. That then wounded my trust in him. And I began to pull away from him. He became angrier because he couldn't have sex whenever he wanted it. These are very important things to look at in terms of what contraceptive mentality does to a loving relationship and how it wounds it in many different ways. People
Who generally in our generations, the last several generations, have not lived through war, have not lived through a depression or deep recession, who are suffering, believe it or not, from a great disease, which some person has called affluenza, which is that people have so much money, they've never really suffered. So they see life as a roller coaster, amusement park. So I think we have a lot of young Catholics who don't fully understand the very nature of marriage, don't fully understand deep friendship and what's required to make a healthy commitment, lifelong commitment in the sacrament of marriage.
Wow, Father, there's a lot of powerful things in that segment. I was taking notes here. The indissolubility, huge. People have the right to remarry, quote unquote. The divorce rate, even among Catholics, over 50%. The use of contraception. I love that spot about affluenza. We are living in a time where people have more time and money disposable than ever before. And but the one that really grasped me is right there at the end. People are getting married to have their needs fulfilled.
Oh, yes.
So that whole concept of hedonism and that where our life is about pleasure, it's really sunk into the minds of even the best of us. This idea that we have needs and they're to be fulfilled first and foremost as the priority.
Right. Get it all now. That seems to be the philosophy. But, I don't want to blame everything on this modern day and age because I think we lose perspective on the larger picture. Mr. Buono, the whole problem is original sin and the consequences thereof. Now, I'm going to reveal to you, Mr. Buono, my main fault. Okay, I'm going to do this.
Okay. Should I brace myself?
Brace yourself, Mr. Buono. My main fault, Mr. Buono, and I've known it all my life.
Hold on, let me ask you, Father, what is your main fault?
My main fault, Mr. Buono, is self-centeredness. Self-centeredness.
I've never heard of it. Could you expound on that?
Well, I know that perhaps certain persons like yourself might have been exempt. No, I don't think so. Jesus and Mary were exempt. But I don't think anyone else was ever exempt from self-centeredness. It's one of the tragedies, in fact, it is the tragedy of the fall from grace. And Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, made it possible for us to overcome self-centeredness. There is no salvation without Jesus Christ. There is no possibility of overcoming self-centeredness without Jesus Christ. And if anyone wants to be happily married in this life, that person would do well to turn to Jesus Christ, because he is the source of all grace. He lifted up the natural union of man and woman and made it a sacrament. And so persons who are sacramentally married have access to divine help in order to overcome, may I use the word damnable, or is that a censored word? The damnable self-centeredness with which we are afflicted. That's the root problem.
Well, there is a lot more to say on this subject, which we're going to cover in all the other programs. But I think it's sufficient to say that we suffer from selfishness, even the best of us. The culture is working on us, but so is original sin. And we all have to be very careful of this self-centeredness, which is combated by self-giving. This is at the heart of our message. Giving oneself, giving yourself to others in service is the secret to happiness. And it is the secret to a happy marriage. So that's all the time we have today, Father. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you. My pleasure. You're welcome.
Now remember, go to our website, www.roadtocana.com. There's information, resources, book recommendations. This program's available, as well as all of our other programs. And let's work together to help others or yourself and anyone we know who is single to do God's will. And remember, while you're on this road, trust in Jesus always and keep his peace always within.
'Cause it matters.